I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities so that when you are hit with the unexpected, you'll have options from which to choose. And if you're that person who reaches for goals that challenge you to fully reach your potential, this show is for you. You can learn more about the show on my website, www.madelineblair.com/unlockedtv. And it includes all the replays of earlier shows. So thank you for joining me today. Stress is often an unwelcome gift of this season. Burnout is one result. We'll be talking today that burnout doesn't have to happen. This show is being broadcast in December, the month of the year that seems to be celebrated in so many traditions. That means that just about all of us are busier than usual as we prepare for whatever holiday we are a part of. For me, this holiday means preparing my spiritual life, recognizing the gifts of friends and family through offering them gifts. It means adding special decorations to my home to remind me of the occasion that is being celebrated. All of these things add up. They add activities and attention to my already busy life. If I'm not careful, I will feel the stress build up. But holiday seasons are not the only time when we feel stress. In fact, our entire society is designed in ways that can increase our stress levels. On top of holidays, we are still dealing with what I will call the leftovers from COVID. And I use that word advisedly as it is not exactly over, just at a different level. We're also dealing with the news about war, suicides increasing, inflation possibilities, shootings. All of these added to days full of work and massive deluge of data lead to burnout. We're going to be talking about burnout and why and how it doesn't have to happen. We're going to take a quick break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. You're listening to Unlocked. I'm your host, Madeline Blair, and our guest today is Dr. Greg Hammer. Greg, welcome to Unlocked.
So great to be with you, Madeline.
Actually, I should say welcome back, because I think this is your second time with me, and I'm just delighted to have you back. Well, let me tell the audience a bit about you. Greg Hammer is a pediatric intensive care physician, pediatric anesthesiologist, and professor at Stanford University Medical Center. He's a member of the Stanford WellMD Initiative and the Wellness Committee for the American Society of Anesthesiologists. Dr. Hammer is currently the chair of the Physician Wellness Task Force for the California Society of Anesthesiologists. I can't believe I finally choked on one of those words. But I made it almost all the way through. And he's been a visiting professor and lecturer on wellness at the institutions worldwide and teaches GAIN to medical students, residents, and fellows at Stanford. And he's also the author of the book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. Your book was published in May of 2020, just as healthcare professionals were facing what must have been one of the most challenging times as COVID had just hit. My book about nurturing your resilience, Unlocked, was published just 6 months before we knew that COVID was going to hit our lives. So, Greg, I decided that you and I have won the award for reading the future. So again, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you.
As I prepare for these shows, I have teenagers that I ask to give me questions because I tell them what the show is going to be about, and because they always see things differently. Normally, I just sort of fit those questions into the program, but I think today I'm going to start with their questions. It says, the first question was, when has burnout affected you the most, and how did you overcome it?
That is a great question. It's a little bit hard to say. I can think of events in my career and in my life that were very stressful. I lost my son 5 years ago at the age of 29.
Ooh.
I struggled with that a bit. So naturally, it was a parent's worst nightmare.
Mm.
And there are other episodes less profound, I suppose, during my life and my career that have represented bumps in the road and added to the stress of an already stressful job. And as you suggested, life itself is a chronic stress. So I can't really name one thing. I can think of various times in my life when stress has been a major factor. And particularly with the loss of my son, I can say that my strong spiritual belief, study of Advaita, helped me recognize that we are all made of the same stuff. Everything we see and experience is, in fact, the same stuff. And death is a part of life. And I think that with regard to my son, working with dying children and dealing with their heroism in many cases and the strength of their families has also helped me deal with that particular issue. So I think the overall or overarching answer is that the way that I've dealt with stress in my life and my career, particularly of late, is embodied by the acronym GAIN. The start of the title of that book that you mentioned, which is comprised of gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And we can certainly discuss those in more detail, but I think they are really collectively the answer and support the pillars that support our resilience and our ability to cope with chronic stress.
Thank you for taking on that very tough question. I knew it was tough when I asked it, but I said, teenagers really know how to get to the issue, and I said, let's honor that. And so again, thank you. All right. Well, I think I'm going to bring you more on screen. I decided this is a better view for us. Okay. We're going to begin with burnout. I want to know, what is burnout and why should we be concerned about it?
Burnout is a syndrome, if you will, that is the result of chronic stress. And the manifestations of burnout are many and varied. I think we all express those symptoms, if you will, or embody those symptoms differently, but we have many things in common. Chronic stress and burnout involve changes in our cardiovascular system, changes in our immune system, changes in our hormones, changes in our sleep, our eating habits, our exercise habits, and these are all interconnected. And chronic stress leading to burnout results in impatience, obsession, even magnified compared to our normal overthinking of the past and the future, and difficulty being present, which is where happiness lives. And so burnout is really a syndrome resulting from chronic stress. And you enumerated in the opening the several factors that I think make this the most chronically stressful time that many of us have experienced in our lifetime, with COVID, global food shortages, horrific war. Now we are dealing with inflation and economic hardship for so many people. Mass shootings, which is, just defies the ability to comprehend and to absorb. So many things that we're all dealing with that result in chronic stress, on top of the chronic stress associated with life itself. We are our brains have become wired through tens of thousands of years of evolution in ways that interfere with our ability to be happy and represent stress. We overthink the past and the future. We have a hard time being present, which, when you think about it, really is where happiness resides. We also have a negativity bias. We tend to remember the negative and forget the positive. And so these are areas in which chronic stress is manifest at a baseline, just under the best of circumstances, really. So then you take all those other factors, which in the last 5 years have presented themselves in ways that I think none of us have experienced in our lifetime. And it's not surprising that there's a lot of burnout resulting from all of that stress.
I'll tell you what impresses me with what you just said. The fact that stress affects everything about us. It's not just one little piece of us. It's everything. Wow.
Well, one of the things that attracted me to medicine, I started out as a child and teenager and even at university thinking I wanted to be an astronomer. And I remember many very cold nights, and those were the clearest nights outside of Chicago, in the negative degree Fahrenheit temperatures with my telescope on the end of my driveway, pondering the wonders of the planets and the universe, and really just excited about the relationship between the micro and the macro. And that's evident in the universe, but it's also evident in human biology, the relationship between subcellular structures and organelles within cells and cells themselves forming tissues, organs, the body. The interrelationship of everything is paramount. And when you talk about the physiology of chronic stress, again, you see that everything is interrelated. For example, when we're stressed, our thoughts go to the past and future and sort of incessantly in the sort of cyclical thinking process, overthinking process we all experience. It impacts our sleep. We don't sleep well. We become fatigued. When we're fatigued, we tend to put our exercise regimen to the side.
I have to interrupt you. I have to interrupt you, Greg, because that comment about interrupted sleep, there have been days when I said to my husband, I think I have to take a nap because I'm too tired to sleep. Is that really true?
I can only venture a guess as to the physiology behind that phenomenon, which I think we've all experienced. I do think when we're really fatigued, it kind of activates our sympathetic nervous system to try to compensate. And so, yes, I think sometimes when we're really so tired that we can't sleep, it's because we're experiencing that stress. We're embodying that stress that we're feeling. And, the other thing is when we're fatigued, we tend to pick up sugary and fatty, so-called comfort foods. So the three pillars of our physical well-being, sleep, exercise, and nutrition, all deteriorate. And these are kind of self-propagating and interrelated. And as I said, affect all of the physiologic systems in our body. So as you pointed out in the opening, it's paramount that we really focus on ways to increase our personal resilience so that we can begin to reverse these processes.
As you're talking, I'm not a person who likes sweet things. So sugar is not in my diet very much. It's there, of course, but now I'm thinking about it and I'm realizing there are times when I want to have some carbs. I want to have some pasta or some pretzels. I'm going to use that now as a way to say, okay, Madeline, this is a signal. What's happening here?
Well, I think that what you just said is so important, Madeline. That is that when we embody a practice such as GAIN, the wonderful thing that happens is we become much more attuned to these cravings and, in some ways, regressions that we experience in our eating habits, exercise, sleep hygiene. And so little light bulbs go off when we begin to behave in ways that are sort of contrary to our physical and emotional well-being. So as you said, a light bulb may go off that this is not something that I normally eat, that may not be good for me. And that's so important, is that we are attuned to our bodies and such that we experience those little light bulb moments when we're reaching for a cup of coffee in the afternoon because we're tired. And then a little light bulb may go off and we may recognize that, wow, I'm really sensitive to caffeine. Caffeine has a half-life, as we say in pharmacology, of 6 hours or so. So that means that 150 milligrams of caffeine that we take in at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon are still 50% of that blood level, if you will, that results from that cup of coffee is still there 6 hours later, and 25% of it 6 hours after that. And if you're sensitive to caffeine like I am, that is going to be very disruptive of sleep. And so again, on and on goes this cycle of disrupted sleep, poor dietary habits, poor exercise habits, resulting in deterioration of our sleep, etc. So yes, those light bulb moments when we recognize that what we're doing or about to do is really contrary to our wellness is just so important.
You know, in my practice, I advise people to write personal stories from their life so that they can use those stories as kind of a mirror into what actually formed them, because that's part of understanding who you are. And highly resilient people know who they are. I mean, that's your foundation that you start with. And as you're talking, I'm realizing I think may add to that and take a moment to write some stories about your body, rather than just events in your life, because that what I think would do exactly what you're saying, highlight when the light bulb should go off.
Well, I think as you're suggesting, again, we get back to the interrelationship of everything. And our physical well-being is so closely interrelated to our emotional and spiritual well-being. If our sleep, exercise, and nutrition are off the rails, then we're distracted by our bodies. We don't feel that well. We maybe are putting on weight. Our pants are getting tight. And these are distractions from what's really important, which is our happiness, our ability to focus on the present moment, except when adaptive to consider the past and future. And our physical well-being is so closely related to our emotional and spiritual well-being. It's so important that we recognize that.
You've talked about gain and you listed them. I wonder, let's take a minute and just sort of tease these out, because I think every one of them is really important into what we've been talking about.
Sure. Well, GAIN is an acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And gratitude is, I think we can all empirically recognize, intrinsically important to our happiness. And one way to conceive of that is that we can imagine somebody who's poor and happy. We can imagine somebody who's physically challenged and happy, but we can't imagine somebody who's ungrateful and happy. So there you go. And there are actually a lot of studies in the medical literature that gratitude is linked to happiness. And as we become more grateful, we generally become happier. And back to the interrelationship of our emotional and spiritual well-being to our physical well-being, we sleep better. So, for example, there's a wonderful study that had been ongoing and may still be ongoing at Duke University, which is called 3 Good Things. And what they've demonstrated in tens of thousands of subjects is that simply thinking of, writing down, if you're somebody who likes to journal, 3 good things before you go to sleep at night, just doing that practice for 2 weeks leads to months of improved sleep and higher quality of life, according to validated surveys that the subjects fill out. So simply expressing your gratitude for the good things that happened that day, at the end of the day, leads to improved sleep and overall sense of well-being. So gratitude is clearly an essential ingredient to happiness.
And I want to add a story to this, which is somewhat tangential, but I think you'll get the message. Many years ago, and I say many, it's got to be, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I decided that I was going to thank my husband for anything that he did for me. If he passed me the salt, I would say thank you. If he opened a door, I would say thank you. Whatever it was, I just decided I was going to do it for a year. So I did it for a year. And the funny thing was that he began coming back and thanking me. I mean, I never said a word of what I was doing, but he began to thank me. And what happened was that our relationship deepened. So you talk about happiness. There's another way in which it really does bring happiness.
That's a great example, Madeline. I love that. Well, the A in gain represents acceptance. And this is really an acknowledgement that there's pain in life as well as joy, and sadness as well as elation. And this is inevitable. It's part of the human condition. And we can't just ignore it, pretend that life is just this bowl of cherries, so to speak. There's something called a spiritual bypass. I love that term, which is where people just sort of skip over the pain and just, imagine that everything is wonderful. Well, it's not. I mean, there are painful experiences that we all go through, and the loss of a loved one, for example. Many other things happen which represent pain, and again, our nature is to be somewhat negative and take things personally and ruminate over things in the past that we can't change, and feel shame, embarrassment, regret. And when we think of things in the future that we can't change or haven't happened, we overthink it. And with our negativity bias, we experience anxiety and fear. So these are just intrinsic to our human nature. And so we need to acknowledge the pain that we all experience. And in the gain practice, we actually, as we're in touch with our breath, with our eyes closed, we actually focus on a painful experience, and we bring that experience closer and closer. And we actually imagine opening our chest and opening our heart and bringing that pain into our heart and actually enveloping it, nurturing it with our heart. And what we find is, as we slowly breathe and imagine this pain merging with our heart, one thing is the pain is not so bad, and we can accept it. And you may recall a formula in the book, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. And so the pain is inevitable. And when we resist it, we suffer more. So the opposite of resistance is acceptance. If we fully accept or let go of our resistance completely, our suffering diminishes and may even go away, despite the pain.
You know what that reminds me of are people who feel they have to have revenge. And all they're doing is increasing that resistance factor. Yes?
Absolutely. There are so many ways that we resist pain. We can focus on revenge as a way of trying to, have the pain pushed aside because we can get the person back, or we can exact our revenge and the pain will go away, or we can just try not to think about it, or we can sort of rationalize it. If it comes from another person, we can depersonalize that person. Or if we're, thinking of something awful that happened to someone, we can sort of say, well, they did it. They brought it on themselves. They smoked cigarettes. They did this or that. So those are all ways of resisting. And I think, as you mentioned, revenge can be one. And so let's just put all those judgments aside and allow the pain, literally allow it, bring it in closer and closer, merge with it until there's no separation. And as a brilliant non-duality teacher, Rupert Spira, said, we ask ourselves the question, can I live with this pain forever? And when the answer is yes, then we have accepted.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. If I can live with this pain forever. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to write that down.
And then we go to intention. And the reason intention is so vital to our happiness is that, as we've acknowledged, we have ways of thinking that are very negative and distracted with the past and the future. And happiness is in the present moment. If you think of the happiest times, imagine walking through a forest, feeling that wonderful floor of the forest with the pine needles and the earth. We can feel this sort of padded, crunching sensation on the soles of our feet as we walk through the forest, and we look up at the canopy above and we see the light filtering through the leaves, and it's just magic. And in those moments, we are happy. We feel bliss. We're not thinking about what happened yesterday, how we're embarrassed that we said something we shouldn't have, or being afraid or anxious about tomorrow, or distracted about the list of things we have to do when we get home. We're just right there, and that brings happiness. And this is not our default way of thinking and being, unfortunately. We've gone through tens of thousands of years of evolution. Perhaps there's an evolutionary advantage to being wary all of the time and not present. Maybe this at one point led to enhanced survival and having more offspring when we were cave dwellers, and perhaps there was a saber-toothed tiger lurking outside the mouth of our cave. That, being wary increased our survivability, and this sort of genetic disposition became entrenched in our DNA. But the good news is that our brains have this wonderful quality called neuroplasticity. And so we can't just relax into our default way of thinking and maximize our happiness because of this negativity bias, this wariness, this distraction with the past and future. But again, the good news is we can change the way we think if we're intentional or purposeful. And, one of my mentors, if you will, although we don't know each other personally, Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, defined mindfulness as awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. And the on purpose, again, is acknowledgement that we have to have a plan. We have to have a practice, because if we just operate in our default mode, we're going to be negative. We're going to be overthinking the past and future. We're not going to be as happy as we can be. But again, if we're intentional or purposeful about our thought processes, and with the game practice, by really focusing our thoughts and then eventually our behaviors and our experience on these 4 principles on purpose, we can be much, much happier, more resilient people, even in the midst of very stressful ongoings around us.
Yeah, the trick here is we're in the holiday season now. So what are some things you would recommend that, okay, I haven't done them for 3 years or anything like that, but is there something I can do now that would just give me a little relief?
Again, I would go to the GAIN principles. What can I do now? I can embrace my gratitude. I can have a gratitude practice, whether it's 3 good things in the evening before we go to sleep, focusing on 3 good things that happened today. And there's always 3 good things that happened. Even our discussion right now, Madeline, will be on my list tonight. Sitting in my office here at Stanford, looking out the window at the beautiful garden, simply enjoying this breath, which 10 years ago I thought I might not be alive to enjoy. There are always good things that we can be grateful for. So embracing a gratitude practice, embracing an acceptance practice, recognizing that we can be purposeful and change the way we think. So during this holiday season, as we lapse into our default way of negative thinking and we start to make a list of the things that aren't going well, that we're unhappy about, our finances, the loss of somebody we love, maybe who was with us virtually or otherwise last Christmas or Hanukkah holiday season, who's not around this year. being intentional about being grateful for what we have. When my son passed away, of course, I was very sad, but at the same time, when I focused my thoughts intentionally, I was able to be grateful for the 29 years we had together and think of all the wonderful experiences we shared. So there's always gratitude waiting for us to simply embrace it. And so I would recommend people really focus on gratitude, acceptance, intention, and we haven't talked about the importance of non-judgment, but
Well,
it's
let's talk about that now, because one of the things that gets really difficult in this particular season, well, at many times, but certainly this season, where stress goes up, are marriages. I mean, here you are with someone you're committed to, and you have all these things going on. The stress is there. Your partner has this high stress. What are your recommendations that not just what to do, but how to advise the person to introduce the practices to their partner? Now, I gave one example of mine, which I was just modeling, but that took a whole year.
Well, you started talking about teenagers, and
Yes.
I'm fortunate enough to partner with a wonderful PhD whose name is John Retker in writing a book at the present time, which is tentatively at least called A Mindful Teen. And teenagers, as you said, are so open, and yet they have a lot of stress in their lives as well.
Yeah.
And the way that we can really best parent and teach and counsel our teens is by example. So when you say, when you're in a marriage or other close relationship with somebody and they're stressed, the best way that we can help them is by embodying personal resilience ourselves. And, I always go back to the GAIN principles. And you in fact told your story about embodying the G in GAIN, which is gratitude, and how this affected your husband and your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing we can do, I think, in any relationship, whether it's with a teen, a spouse, or someone else that we're close to, is focus intentionally on embodying right principles ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this will have, fruitful results in all of our relationships.
You sound just like my mother. Because when I was a new mother, I said, "Oh, I don't know what to do." She said, "Madeline, it doesn't matter what you say to this child. This child will learn from what you do. So you better be the person you want them to be." And it was unbelievable advice.
That is great advice.
Yeah. So I just have to be this. Okay. All right. It won't happen overnight, but at least it can begin.
Well, our brains are wired the way they are, as I said, over the result of tens of thousands of years of evolution. And so we're not going to change them. We're not going to change our default way of thinking 180 degrees in a day, a week, or a month. But I think the positive news is that even just baby steps forward on a consistent basis will yield bountiful results. So the GAIN practice, for example, we get up in the morning, we open the blinds, we do our morning hygiene thing, and then we find a comfortable place to sit for just 3 to 5 minutes, get in touch with our breath, focus on these GAIN elements sequentially, return to our breath, and then we're ready to open our eyes and go out in the world. Just doing this brief practice, similar to the 3 good things practice, which really takes no time at all. Day after day, as the weeks and months pass and we look back, we will recognize how much progress we made. You know what? I'm actually feeling a little bit happier. I'm actually sleeping a little bit better. And, this is what the investigators found in the 3 good things studies. And it's true. We have to have no expectations. We're not going to change overnight. And so if we begin to get frustrated that we're lapsing back into a depression or a very negative way of thinking of the world and ourselves, a light bulb can go off and remind ourselves not to be self-judgmental. So we haven't talked about the N in gain or non-judgment, but again, all these elements are so closely interrelated, but judgment is certainly one way that we enhance our suffering. And so again, this is optional. By taking these small baby steps and gradually rewiring our brains into a new way of thinking and being, we can actually become happier. But it's a process like life itself.
Well, let's talk about that non-judgment, because we talk about intention, and that I see that in a couple of ways. But the non-judgment, that's a painful thing to actually try to get through. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, going back to Dr. Kabat-Zinn, he defined mindfulness, and I think it could be a definition of happiness too, as awareness of the present moment. So the importance on being present, where happiness lives. On purpose, the importance of intentionally guiding the way we think and behave. Non-judgmentally, awareness of the present moment, on purpose, non-judgmentally. And the reason that non-judgment is so important is that it veils our happiness. So our minds are constantly evaluating everything in our environment and generally assigning properties of goodness or badness in some way to those things. And because of our negativity bias, we err on the side of negative judgments. And unfortunately, we're most harshly self-judgmental. So we judge ourselves more harshly than we judge others. And this is, again, something that's been well studied. And I think we can all relate to the fact that if we are down on ourselves about a particular thing that we did, for example, we're overthinking the past and we have this negativity bias. So we're just feeling embarrassed, we're feeling regret, we're judging ourselves. Imagine if we were talking to a good friend who had the same experience for which we're judging ourselves. So they did what we did and they're feeling the way we feel, and do the thought experiment of having a conversation with that individual. Would we be judging them poorly? Would we be telling them, oh, you so-and-so, how could you possibly do that? No, we would be actually reassuring them. We would be showing compassion to them. We would be empathizing with them. And yet when it comes to ourselves, we have the hardest time doing that. So I think this is a great cognitive behavioral exercise when we're judging ourselves very negatively. Just imagine that we're talking to a good friend who's in the same situation, and imagine how we would be reassuring and compassionate toward that person. So this is, I think, a good example, a very palpable example of self-judgment.
I like this because if you can practice it for yourself, which is usually harder, then that ability is going to translate out into the world more easily.
Very much so. And when we judge things, we're seeing them through a tinted lens, if you will. So by calling something good or bad, or too much of this or not enough of that, we're actually veiling our observation. We're not seeing things as they truly are. And, it's not necessary to label things with judgments. And so in the gain practice, one way of contemplating non-judgment when we've gone through the gratitude, acceptance, and intention contemplation is to imagine the Earth, one of these beautiful NASA images. The Earth is suspended in space, and it's a beautiful planet, but it is simply the planet that it is. It is neither good or bad intrinsically. And if that's true, then turn our thoughts inward and toward ourselves, and we too are simply the person that we are. We are neither good nor bad. And so again, the gain elements are all interrelated. This is a way of accepting ourselves through non-judgment. Drop the judgments of good or bad or this or that, and recognize that we simply are the person that we are, as the earth is the planet that it is, as the ocean is simply as it is. It is neither good nor bad. And then I think it's only logical to apply that same way of thinking and being when we consider ourselves.
I can really see that helping the practice. I mean, I can go through a long list of things that I can now say, okay, the earth is neither good nor bad. The sky is neither good nor bad. The stars are neither good nor bad. The moon is neither good. And so in other words, slowly as I come back and then come closer and closer to myself, I can see that that kind of, it almost becomes the habit of thinking, and I am neither good nor bad. It's what I do. It's
consider somebody that we're judging. Well, maybe we're unhappy with the way they're behaving, or maybe they said something unkind to us. Well, they had their reasons for doing that. And perhaps they themselves are unhappy. Perhaps they themselves had a difficult upbringing, or, through the nurturing or lack thereof with their parents and their family, they have acquired this critical, negative way of looking at the world, perhaps including the way they look at me. Well, I should have compassion toward them. Should I judge them as bad because they're unhappy? And the words perhaps that come out of their mouths are sometimes a manifestation of their unhappiness. No, I mean, I think when you think of it objectively, it's clear that that doesn't make them bad. If anything, we should have compassion toward them, even though they may be disrespecting us or saying something unkind toward us. Mm-hmm. It is they that are unhappy, and they're unhappy for a combination of nurturing and genetic or natural reasons, undoubtedly, in the big picture. So we don't need to judge them poorly just because of the way they behave. We can just imagine that they are neither good nor bad. They just are the way they are.
And it says that when you see that, you really focus on the behavior, not the person. So I may feel that the fact that you yelled at me, I don't like that, because that was not something that's good for me or even you. So I can judge it that way, but not you. You may have yelled because that's a behavior that you always used in your family or something. Okay, that's helpful. Distinguish those two things. Wow, this is exciting, because it says to me there are so many paths we can take to, and I think the word is happiness, that we can find more happiness. Before we end, and we're just about out of time, I want to make sure this new book that I know you're writing. Why don't you just take a minute and tell folks that, and then that'll set it up so that when the book is ready to be published, we'll have you back on it to say more.
Sure. Well, in thinking of the GAIN practice, I wonder who beside those in healthcare can really benefit from this. I think everybody. But what group of people are really going through the most stressful period of time? And I thought, well, teenagers, because what a stressful decade or so that is at its best. And then just imagine everything they've gone through with COVID, trying to have virtual education, missing out on their graduation, their proms, and just so many other things. So I reached out to somebody that was at Stanford. Again, his name is John Retker. And said, John, what do you think about applying these principles to teenagers? Because he's a therapist who uses a mindfulness-based practice to counsel teenagers. And so he was excited about it. My publicist was excited about it. We eventually recruited a third author, who is Eric Wentworth, Carol Ann's husband. We talked offline about our mutual friend, Carol. And so, so we're in the midst of finalizing the first 5 chapters in the book proposal that'll go out to publishers from our book agent. And we're all very excited about it.
Oh, you should be, because I do think that teenage years, and I've had several wonderful guests on that talked about that. In particular, Dr. Paloma Torres Davila from Puerto Rico, where she's the head of psychology there. She really laid it out so that I began to understand what traumatic years these are in all of our lives. Fortunately for you and I, we've gone through it, and we don't have to worry about that anymore.
No, and we wouldn't want to go through it again.
Absolutely not. But just recognizing how traumatic they are, I'm delighted that you're focusing that attention there. So thank you for that little preview, shall we say. Well, we are out of time, but I guess the only thing I can say, Greg, is thank you again so much. I always enjoy our conversations. They are
Likewise, Madeline, and I'd be honored to join you anytime.
Thank you so much. All right, stay tuned as I get myself together for this final push. What a great conversation this was. I can't believe how many insights I gained just from these few minutes talking with Greg. So I want to also thank you in the audience for being with me. You know, in my work on resilience, I know that as we are hit by unexpected, we are best able to make the right decision about moving forward when our minds are at ease, able to think clearly, and conscious that we are able to make a good decision. Today, Dr. Hammer's ideas of burnout are so relevant as a complement to the practices I recommend. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. If you have, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, click the like button. Better yet, subscribe or follow me. Check out Greg's book, Gain, for caring for your happiness, and my book, Unlocked, for practices for nurturing your resilience, practices that work. If you would like to explore what it means for yourself to build and nurture your resilience, send me an email to madeline@madelineblair.com and I'll get back to you. And if you would like to join the group mentoring program, Unlocking Together, or are just curious about it, write and tell me that. I'll send you more information about it and keep you informed when the program begins. Well, thank you again for joining us here on this segment of Unlocked. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.